What's going on, everybody? We have a full house, I think. Let's see. Let me get these awesome folks. That's better. Let's move him up there, me down here. There we go. Sweet. We'll leave them muted for just a minute while I introduce everything and say hi to everybody. Global Mom, Rob Parks, who's here and there at the same time. Weird. Cheese Mondo, good to see you. I was able to catch part of your show. I like that call-in format. It's pretty cool. I like the little speakeasy, like detective reporter style thing you got going on. That 50s, 30s, what was it, 30s, 20s, 20s? God damn, I'm fucking tired. I need to sleep. What is sleep? Elizabeth, good to see you. Charlie Welch, good to see you. Good to see you. The Raven says, what does the Raven say? I saw it just a second ago. Where is it? I'm really excited about this one. Nerd Angle is going to crush it. I think she might be a little bit biased. I don't know. Just saying. Well, it is good to see everybody in here. Mute Donkey says, this is a silly debate. I hope the debaters know that. Well, you are entitled to your opinion. It is what it is. We're going to have some fun. Now, there might be a little bit of misunderstanding and miscommunication with what is going on with this actual debate. I'll let the debaters get more into their points of view for certain. Raven says purely objective. I believe you. Yeah. Turner Regime, how you doing? All right. Angel Gamer, hello. So basically what we're talking about here is we're not talking about whether or not Loki has always been, quote, gender fluid or not based on Norse mythology. Obviously, people who've read Norse mythology, which I'm pretty sure everybody here has, understands that. Of course, Rob Parks. The question is, why did the MCU choose to wait so long to introduce that aspect of Loki's character? Was it because they were trying to stay true to the source material, or are they pandering to an audience? That's what we're here to debate. And with that, let me introduce you to your debaters. Taking the pandering side, we have the Rob. Say hello.
Howdy, y'all.
And
I'm going to change.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You're gonna change what? You're gonna change your. You're gonna change your rock. What the?
Change my camera.
What just happened?
I know.
My goodness.
This way I have my desk so I can, write notes and stuff like that. So
I see. That was spiffy. Look at you, all snazzy.
Hey, now, I like, I want to make this look good. So for you, Johnny.
Well, see, now it just means I have to get another camera and do all that fancy schmancy stuff. Taking the opposite position would be the one and the only. You have to unmute yourself.
I know.
There you go. Nerd Angle, the amazing insurance salesman.
Yes, I'm great, but tonight I'm not here to talk to you about insurance. I'm here to talk to you about pandering or lack thereof.
Awesome. Yes, production value, hashtag or Octothorpe production value. All right. No, this isn't a debate about Denmark's demolition of Wales, unfortunately.
No.
I'm assuming that's like some sort
football.
of football or soccer, as we call it here in the States. All right. So what we're going to do is we have our usual debate format. So we're going to take 10 minutes to present your opening arguments. Then we'll have a little bit of a back and forth when it comes to presenting the 3 points. So whoever goes first will present opening. We'll just do presenting opening arguments at the beginning. So whoever would like to go first, we can either flip a coin. I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. We'll just go that route. But if you have a coin flip, well, what do you got there?
Or we could do it the really nerdy way.
We should do it that way.
Percentile dice.
You should do it the nerdy way. Okay, we'll do it the
percentile dice.
I don't have any dice.
You'll have to trust me, but you can call high or low, and I'll read out the number.
Okay.
All right.
Hi.
53. So you win.
So, right. Nerd Angle, you can go first with your opening arguments, or you can defer. It's up to you.
I would like to go first.
All right. Let me make this work here. Boom. You have the floor.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here for everybody, I think. There we go. All right. So we are here to debate, is Loki's gender fluidity J.K. Rowling level pandering. Spoiler alert, no, it's not. So why are we here tonight? Dr. Rob Parks went ahead and shared a tweet after seeing the spoiler or the teaser trailer for Loki, saying Loki's gender is fluid. What kind of Rowling level pandering bullshit is this? You know who I believe is gender fluid? Captain Jack. And if you're thinking eyeliner, you don't know the face of Bo. I'm assuming you spelt it B-O because of the character limits. This is all based off a tweet with a picture where it's a rap sheet for Loki and the sex is listed as fluid. First of all, let's go ahead and figure out, well, actually, first, let's go ahead and address Captain Jack. So, Captain Jack Harkness, or the face of Bo, is absolutely not gender fluid. A character who first appeared on BBC's Doctor Who he is admittedly a man. He never says he's not a man. And at no point during his time on Doctor Who or Torchwood does he say he's not a man or identify as a man. Captain Jack Harkness is more like the epitome of a pansexual man, woman, or any alien life form that he finds attractive, he will try to sleep with. So it's not that he's gender fluid. He's pansexual at best. And as the meme says, anything, and I mean anything that moves, could get the Captain Jack Harkness smile. So then let's try and figure out what is J.K. Rowling level pandering. Rob Parks could be referring to the October 2007 news that had come out a few weeks after Deathly Hallows publishing that Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, was homosexual. Oops, sorry. At the time that was announced, J.K. Rowling received backlash because it was said that she was pandering to the woke crowd, because this was not exactly written into the books. By the way, it is important that we should note that the woke movement has been around in some form or another since at least the 1860s, when Abraham Lincoln supporters and his Republican Party pushed the Wide Awake movement to oppose the spread of slavery. So the issue with the claim that this was pandering to the woke crowd is that it would completely make sense that the students at Hogwarts wouldn't know what Dumbledore's sexuality is. They're his students. They have no business knowing what his sexuality is. It's never brought up. Dumbledore has a point of view chapter in all 7 books, and it's the one at the beginning of book 1, where he's there to meet Hagrid and get the child that lived. And that, at no point do you get that glimpse. So it would make sense that in all of the books, and in fact, in Deathly Hallows, there's numerous times where Harry brings up that it's weird that he knows so little about Dumbledore. When he starts learning about Dumbledore's sister, when he learns about Dumbledore's brother, all of these times he's very frustrated about how little he knew about Dumbledore's personal life. So why would he know about Dumbledore's sexuality? So maybe that's what he's talking about. But JK did later work on the prequels and the movies, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. And now it is in canon that Dumbledore is homosexual. And it has been shown, not told to you. So maybe he means something else. And with J.K. Rowling, there's a plethora of tweets. Over the years, following the completion of Harry Potter novels and films, the author J.K. Rowling has taken to Twitter and on occasion either pointed things out that were never in the books or things that were left open, like Hermione's skin color. It's never expressly stated. When she does take to Twitter about this comment, it's because a black actress was cast in a play for the Cursed Child. And she's saying that I support it because we never actually came out and said what her skin color was. Now, again, this stuff isn't in the source. She comes out and she tweets about there being 2 Jewish wizards and they're in Ravenclaw, or there was a Jewish wizard in Ravenclaw. So a lot of this stuff was not in the source, which I get. We could say that that's pandering because she's showing us this stuff. She's telling us this stuff. She's not showing us through her written word. So we can consider that to be pandering. But is it so bad to pander in that way for your fans? Many authors like Brandon Sanderson talk at length on the genre's need to be more diverse and tell stories from varying walks of life. It will keep the genre fresh for years to come, kind of like the Marvel brand, but we'll get into that later. So, is it pandering because it wasn't in the source? Because if you're calling it J.K. Rowling level pandering, you're saying that because it wasn't in the source, this is pandering. But yes, it is in the source. as I will go into in our further, 3-point presentations, this is absolutely not pandering. The mythology, and I know you're going to say, yeah, you agree, it's different because this is the MCU. It's not. They're using Loki, the trickster god. He refers to himself as a god numerous times. He talks about Asgard. He talks about Ragnarok. Talks about Thor. Odin refers to him as his adopted son. They keep the Lofi son, meaning that he's not actually Odin's child. He's, a child of a frost giant that he adopted. We can look at the past Marvel comics, which do dictate what happens in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I get that they're two different things, but more importantly, this is all encompassing of the Marvel brand itself. The Marvel brand is going in this direction and has always been going in this direction. This is what Marvel literally stands for. They stand for diversity, inclusion, and the little blip that you get at the end of the comics from Stan Lee, I forget what they're called, he rants and raves about this numerous times, about diversity, about inclusion, about needing to respect and understand everybody's walks of life. This is not new to Marvel. People keep bringing up Marvel as if they're pandering, but maybe it's just Marvel being Marvel. And with that, I yield back the remainder of my time.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Angle, for that excellent presentation. Let me get this here reset. All right, Rob, when you are ready.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Nerd Angle. That was a fabulous opening statement, and I definitely have thoughts on what you said. I think you did an excellent job of detailing J.K. Rowling's pandering, and I will be using that term, to her audience from 2007 onward. She includes facts like Dumbledore is in fact a top, which I know I will cherish to know for the remainder of my days. After the 2007 reveal that Dumbledore was gay, as you pointed out, a number of people had backlash because of pandering. Some of the articles that were written, how pandering by J.K. Rowling has shaped the legacy of Harry Potter, Pindia.com, J.K. Rowling and the Art of Pandering, Medium.com, Pandering, the True Crimes of Grindelwald, Cardinal Points Online. This is not a singular belief that I had. This is a widespread accusation laid at Rowling's door. And the reason why it is laid at Rowling's door, and the reason why it is pandering, is you mentioned that the students wouldn't know about his sexuality. Fair. However, this isn't about the students of Hogwarts. This is about the audience. She never indicates either obliquely, or she could write another point of view chapter in Deathly Hallows, where he doesn't even have to admit to Harry Potter, but as he's dying, or I guess this would be in Half-Blood Prince, spoiler alert, he could think about Grindelwald and how the love of his life betrayed him. But no, there's none of that. There is nothing in the books that indicates his sexuality one way or the other. And there is no indication of that in the movies. And incidentally, before 2007, if you look, J.K. Rowling was accused of non-inclusivity with her characters. So is this a choice? Is this a creative choice? The question of pandering becomes to, is this a creative choice on behalf of the author or creator, or is this something that the creator is doing, as you mentioned with Sanderson, doing to appease the audience, doing to make the audience happier? Is this a creative choice based on what is best for the character and what is not? I'm going to make 3 points. One, prior to the outing of Loki, as it were, the MCU has faced significant backlash, including from Anthony Mackie, about the lack of diversity both on camera and off. He made statements that basically criticize Marvel for not having people of color in as main heroes or even villains, and also that there are no people of color writing the scripts or women writing the scripts, making the movies in the back end. So Marvel has an inclusivity problem that they have to deal with, and that is clearly seen with Captain Marvel's release. And so there is evidence to suggest that the reason why they are going into the Loki mythology, as it were, is to pander to the audience, to essentially give them a bone and say, "Oh, look, we are inclusive because we have allowed Loki to be gender fluid." It is very interesting that you brought up Jack Harkness and the fact that he constantly identifies as a male. In the MCU, Loki constantly identifies as a male. Never once does he actually mention that he is in fact a woman. As you pointed out, he is Odin's son, not Odin's daughter, not Odin's child. He is Odin's son. There are also 2 points during the MCU where it could be argued that Loki actually engaged in misogynistic behavior, which I will point out later on. It would be weird for someone who is gender fluid to also be misogynist. My third point is that, and it also is indicative of when you raised with Jack Harkness, gender and sexuality are two drastically different things. You can be male and you can be a homosexual. You can be male and you can be a heterosexual. You can be female, and so forth and so on. The fact that Jack Harkness is a pansexual has nothing to do with his gender. And as for whether or not he is, that's not the subject of this debate. But I bring it up as a point in that you brought up pansexuality. Pansexuality has nothing to do with gender. It also has nothing to do with form, as I hope to show later on. Now, you have argued before, or you seem to, I anticipate that you will argue that the reason why this does not get to J.K. Rowling levels of pandering is because it is actually in the source material. I argue that Loki of mythology and Loki in the comics are different characters to the Loki in film, to the point that they are incompatible. The histories of Loki in mythology and the histories of Loki in comics is incompatible to the history that we see in the MCU. You can call it multiverse theory, as it were. But I would say that anything that Loki does in mythology or in the comics is not germane to this conversation, because this conversation is about whether or not Marvel, the MCU, is pandering to the audience by making Loki is gender fluid. And then finally, I would raise that, again, this is about the audience's knowledge. While this audience may be a bit skewed, I would argue that a good fraction of the MCU audience has not read Norse mythology. I have not read the Loki comics. I have not. So again, the audience, I would submit that there is a large fraction of the MCU audience who is completely ignorant of the source material you will undoubtedly reference. And so those are the 3 points that I make. I don't anticipate winning this debate, but I hope the points that I make will be thought-provoking. This is not one thing that I wish to say as a disclaimer is I am not opposed to the idea of Loki being gender fluid. I am opposed to the way that Marvel has gone about doing so. I do not raise the issue of woke culture, nothing of that nature. And actually, it's more in line to the fact that the way that they are approaching this, it actually will do more harm than good to both the Marvel brand and to gender politics in general. And with that, I yield my time.
All right, let's get both these awesome gentlemen back in here. Let's see. Nerd Angle, you have 10 minutes to present your 3 points, and then Rob, you will get your rebuttal. Nerd, do you need to share your screen?
Yep. Hold on.
All right.
Again, let me go ahead and do share screen 2. All right, should be sharing.
Okay, and whenever you're ready.
Perfect. All right, so Rob, you're 100% right. I'm totally going to go to the mythology, because if we're saying that it's pandering, we're saying that Marvel chose to do this to appeal to the trans community, to make it was a branding move, etc. I'd also like to point out that you said it was J.K. Rowling level pandering, and you just agreed with me that means that there was stuff that she didn't include in the source that she came out and said later. So we have to go back to the source of Loki, the trickster god, who in Marvel Comics and the Marvel movies continuously calls himself a god from Asgard, which would mean that the mythology is what they use to create and inspire this character. So in the Song of Hindal, Loki finds a half-cooked witch's heart and eats it. By eating it, he becomes pregnant and gives birth to the first ogress, and all future female ogress are born of her. In Loki's Quarrel, it is pointed out that Loki spent 8 years under the earth in the land of the dead. Each winter, he birthed a witch, for a total of 8 witches born of Loki. He's giving birth, so he is having the female ability to give birth to these 8 witches. Loki also used his feminine side concerning the death of Balder. Loki turned into a woman and tricked Frigg into revealing Balder was vulnerable to mistletoe. Loki then takes the form of the elderly giantess Thok and refuses to weep for Balder's rescue from the realm of the dead. And then we go into one of the more popular poems. I would slaughter that name, Thrymskvide, which is when Thor and Loki are trying to get Mjolnir back from a giant who would only part with it if Freya came to marry him. Freya obviously refuses, and Thor and Loki eventually must go as women, Thor the bride and Loki the bridesmaid, to retrieve Mjolnir. And then from the Prose Edda, the one that everyone in chat seems to be very, very familiar with, is when the gods of Asgard hired an unnamed builder to try and construct a wall around Valhall. And in order to do it, they gave him all of these restrictions, and he had to do it by a certain time because for payment, he wanted Freya, the sun, and the moon. So Loki, being the wise ass, when the man asks for just his steed, convinces the gods to let him use his steed. It turns out, with the steed's help, he's able to get the work done, and he's almost about to get it done and on track and within all of the restrictions of the gods. So they tell Loki that he needs to go fix this mess. This guy's about to complete it and ask for Freya and the sun and the moon. So he turns into a mare and goes and gets the stallion distracted so that the builder can't complete it in the time allotted, and then later on sleeps with or entices the stallion to sleep with him, and then he gives birth to the 8-legged horse who eventually becomes Odin's steed. So there are numerous times in the mythology where Loki takes on the form of a female, gives birth as if he is female. So the gender of this god is definitely fluid. But then we can go just to Marvel's comics. Thor, 2007, after the Ragnarok event, Loki is reborn in the body that had been intended for Lady Sif, but he keeps it as his own. 2008, Lady Loki is present during the Secret Wars and is also appearing as the male form in the Thor comics. 2014, Original Sin, Thor and Loki in the 10th Realm. In issue 5, the following is stated by Odin in reference to his children: my child, my son, and my daughter, and my child who is both. Not to mention the numerous times that Loki has shifted into the form of the Scarlet Witch amongst other Marvel female characters. The Marvel Cinematic Universe itself. The fact that Loki hasn't been male since his or has been male since the first appearance of the MCU is irrelevant. Just because we've not seen him take on the form of a woman yet did not mean that he did not have the ability to. It just means the writers hadn't gotten to it yet. Just like we hadn't seen Captain pass the shield on to the Falcon. We knew it was going to happen because we've heard about it in the comics before. We knew that Loki could become a female at any point. We could see a female Loki at any point because we'd seen it in the comics before. We know that there is a multiverse where multiple heroes exist. We've seen Spider-Man, Miles Morales. We'll be seeing Spider-Man Far From Home, which is going to have Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. And who was the other one? There was another one. There's going to be
Andrew Garfield.
There we go. So you see that is the multiverse. You see they even have Spider-Woman and Gwen show up. The MCU and the brand itself has always taught us to expect the unexpected. They've also always strived to have an inclusive and diverse cast. Will Jane Foster's Thor be pandering? It's always been male Thor in the MCU, despite comic readers knowing that there's a female Thor. Will Hawkeye's daughter eventually taking up his bow be considered pandering? Because we know that happens. Is it eventually going to be considered pandering when Falcon comes out as Captain America? Oh, well, that has happened. Has anyone called it pandering? No, because we saw it happening in the comics. Marvel, this is like their bread and butter. They have always had diverse casts. They have always had inclusive characters. This is just Marvel doing more of the same. More importantly, the teaser that spurred Rob Parks' tweet was out of context. Rob, to my knowledge, has to watch the show. How can a critical thinker call it pandering without seeing that this is a fact sheet that the TVA has listing the gender as fluid because it's crucial to the plot? In this multiverse traveling and time traveling show, they need to know that Loki could appear as a woman because they're actually hunting a Loki that is a woman. Take a look at both sides of the argument before deciding that it's pandering, because what you saw was absolutely pivotal to the plot. And then, of course, there's Marvel itself. Over the years, like you've stated, they've constantly been called out as being panderers. Black Panther was pandering to BLM. Captain Marvel is pandering. Captain America being identified as Jewish via his dog tags was pandering, despite the fact that Captain America was created by two Jewish men. Really? So it was paying homage to his creators. Now Loki's gender is being listed as fluid on a TVA rap sheet is also being called pandering. Prime Red brings up in the chat that the fact that his gender fluidity, that's not equatable to someone who's trans. And he's right, it's not. But it might be an allegory for it. And maybe a trans person can identify with this hero now and say, hey, there's a hero in Marvel's cast that relates to me. And to be honest with you, that's just typical Marvel. That's what they do. And you can see that that's what they do when the creators come out and say that the legacy virus from X-Men is how we used an allegory to talk out and inform people about the AIDS pandemic because the company, the CPA that manages comics, wouldn't let us come out and blatantly talk about it. So we had to use allegory to do it. This is their bread and butter. So if you don't like that, Marvel is inclusive. Prime Red knows a very good hero that you might like. His name is Bible Man. And with that, I yield back my time.
All right. So now we are going to give Rob 5 minutes to respond to those points with your counter arguments. And if this puppy dog here doesn't stop nosing me. All right. Whenever you're ready, Rob, your time is going.
Thank you, Johnny. Again, I want to nip something in the bud, particularly with the last statement. I'm making no value judgments as to whether or not Loki's gender fluidity is right or wrong. Actually, I'm happy that he is gender fluid. I would have actually preferred that they introduced that far earlier than they actually did. Pandering happens when it doesn't matter. You're right. I have not watched the show. I didn't want to watch a show before this debate in order to essentially stay objective, because It doesn't matter, and you mentioned this with J.K. Rowling. It doesn't matter what she writes or what she creates after the fact. It doesn't matter what the MCU does before the event, or doesn't matter what the MCU does in the show, because the issue is they did nothing to set up the fact that that Loki is gender fluid. Also, the fact that other people consider Captain Marvel to be pandering is irrelevant. Other than the fact that the reason why they consider it pandering is because Marvel is not inclusive. People do not believe that Marvel, at least the MCU, is actually inclusive. And I will touch on that during my 5 points. Black Panther being pandering, which I find to be funny because Black Panther is not the first Black Marvel superhero. That is, in fact, Blade, who came out in the 90s. But regardless, those arguments are not germane to this debate because they do not involve Loki. Other actions of pandering do not have a relevance on the current manner of pandering, or current matter of whether or not Loki is in fact pandering. I will touch on more on the idea of gender equality, gender identity during my points. But you bring up a valid point, and this is where my difficulty comes in. Where a trans person, if a trans person were to look at Loki and you were to say that, oh, someone like me, no, I would vehemently argue that Loki is not like them. One, trans and gender fluidity are not the same thing. And to a trans person, that may be considered to be insulting to actually equate the two. Gender fluidity is one or multiple changes of gender throughout one's lifetime. Moving from male to female or back again, or even moving from male to non-binary to something else entirely. It has nothing to do with trans. And again, to say that the trans person would look at Loki and be like, oh, somebody like me, that's exactly the point. That is pandering. The idea that, oh, now there's someone I can look at to feel more inclusive. No. The fact that Loki is gender fluid should be integral to his character. It should be part of who he is. It's interesting that in the slide that you brought up, when it's referring to Lady Loki, and I've got a problem with that as well, it says his male form. His male form. Not her male form, not their male form, his male form. So again, the idea is that Loki is inherently male. He can just shapeshift into different sexualities. And the fact that he can shapeshift into a horse really has no bearing on this whatsoever, because a horse, okay, it's a female horse, but he changes it to a horse. That, to me, strikes to bestiality rather than actual gender fluidity. Thor tells Foster in Thor, we are not gods. He is very explicit about the fact that they are not gods. Red Skull in Captain America, the First Avenger, also discounts the fact that they are gods. He believes them to be a technologically advanced species.
10 seconds.
And with that, I will end and continue those points with my 3 points.
All right. So you have the floor with your 3 points. Do you need to share your screen or present? Okay. Whenever you are ready, you may begin.
Okay. All one needs to do is type in the 3 following words: diversity, criticism, MCU. You get Russo brothers on Anthony Mackie's criticism of diversity in the MCU. You have MCU, lack of diversity, and 9 problematic things about the MCU. Take a guess as to what the number one problem of the diversity issues in the MCU are. If you said no LGBTQ characters as of the writing in June 30th, 2020, you would be correct. There were no LGBTQ characters in the MCU. So the contention that the MCU is inclusive is bordering on the absurd. Do you know how many women have written scripts for the MCU? I believe it's 2 out of the 15 movies or so. 2 women, both white. How many have directed films? 1, white. How many people of color? As far as I know, none. The idea that that the MCU, not Marvel Comics, but the MCU is inclusive is just not accurate. Again, point to the source material. I would contend that the mythology and the comics are not source material for the MCU. Yes, it is the same character. However, none of the things that you reference with the mythology were even hinted at in the movies. There was no talk about changing into horses. There was no talk about building stuff. There was no talk about birthing witches. You'd think that might be coming up in one of their, they talked about Punisher Warzone's eating habits. These are characters in Thor that they bandied around. They bragged on each other. Never once would they point out that, oh yeah, hey Loki, you remember when you went into that cave and gave birth to 8 kids? That was a little weird. Never once did they mention that. And why is that? Is it because they had this in mind and they were waiting to spring this on us in 2020 rather than 2011? Or was it because it wasn't even in their consciousness at the time when they made it? And that is what makes it pandering. According to Harvard defines gender fluidity as I said, one or more transitions from one gender into another, male, female, male, male, non-binary, so forth and so on. Gender is significantly different from sexuality. A male can be a person who is identified as male can be homosexual, pansexual, asexual, doesn't matter. Same thing with a female. Gender is also separate from biological consideration. A trans woman or a trans man is a man. It's not a woman. Trans man can give birth. Therefore, the idea that Loki giving birth to anyone is antithetical to the idea that he is, or is saying that he is a woman. Giving birth is not, in terms of gender fluidity, giving birth is no longer a definition of being female, because trans man can in fact give birth, and I think they might be insulted by the insinuation that is the case. But that I strike that comment. Pardon me, I strike that comment. According to the National Center of Transgender Equality, talking about understanding drag, this does not mean drag performers. This does not mean that they are transgender. Just as actors do not keep being referred to by their character names after stepping off stage, drag performers do not necessarily keep the names or pronouns they use while performing. Drag performers are artists and entertainers, so being in drag is not an integral part of their identity in the same way that gender is. Simply transforming yourself into a different gender is not changing one's identity. In fact, the first point that you mentioned was Lady Sif. He actually tried to trick Thor by pretending to be Sif. So he didn't assume a female identity when he became Sif. And I know I'm pronouncing that completely wrong. But anyway, he did not become female when he became Sith. He still was a trickster. He still was Loki. He was just Loki in the body of Sith. In terms of Lady Loki, as another example, I would contend that that's a separate character entirely, because if it wasn't, then why do you call it Lady Loki? Why not just Loki? I mean, it's still Loki. His identity has just shifted to female, but his core being of who he is isn't any different. So the idea of calling him Lady Loki is a bit problematic, in my opinion. But ultimately, it comes down to the fact that, again, it's pandering because it was never hinted. Whether or not Captain Marvel is pandering is irrelevant to that discussion. It's whether or not the MCU laid the foundation for whether or not he was female or even considered to be female at any point. Thor, they continually refer to him as the son. You mentioned that in the comics. He says, my son, my daughter, whatever, yada, yada. In the MCU, he refers to him as my son repeatedly. Loki identifies clearly as a male during that entire movie and in future movies. Also, it can be argued that he has been misogynistic on two occasions. One, he asked Thor, why is your demeanor changed? Why are you like this? Is it because of the woman? And then in a very rapey sort of way, he's like, I can't wait to meet her. The second, and probably more egregious, was when he was talking to Romanoff. He referred to her as a trembling quim, which, if you look it up, is a very polite way of saying cunt. Now, unless he's an Asgardian living down under, that word is considered to be misogynistic and feminine, or misogynistic and offensive in the American culture. Hence why we call it the C word, or see you next Tuesday. It is an American film, therefore it needs to be taken into the context in which it was given. It is clear that he is making a misogynistic comment towards Romanoff. In terms of, and then even though, as I've stated, the gender fluidity or gender form does not equal identity, why does Floki in the MCU never change into a woman? He changes into Odin. He changes into Captain America. I mean, when he changes into Captain America, why did he choose Captain America? Why not Foster? That would seem to be more apropos to what he was trying to needle Thor. So why didn't he choose a character that was, in fact, female that would do the trick? No, he picked Captain America of all people. He has never once in the MCU shown any sign of identifying as female. And I'm regretting not having a drink. Okay.
All right. Nerd, you have 5 minutes to rebut his 3 points, and then we'll get into the open discussion. Your time begins now.
Yeah, so, I mean, unfortunately, I don't know if I really need to go after the 3 points that you bring up, because you put that messaging out based on, the teaser trailer, which showed that little screenshot, and people grabbed the screenshot and were like, look, Loki is gender fluid. Now, again, I don't want to assume I'm not transgender. I don't want to assume anything. I don't know how the LGBTQ plus have responded to it. If they're for it, against it, I don't know. But I do know that Marvel has a consistent, researchable history of making diverse and interesting characters and using allegory to give things for people to relate to. So I would not put it outside of Marvel's grasp to do exactly that. And then you said that Marvel is not inclusive. The MCU is not. They do not have an LGBTQ plus character. Well, that is not correct, because they do now, as Loki has come out and said that he is bisexual. In the third episode, that's all over Twitterverse. Sorry, guys, spoilers, but we were going to have spoilers on this one because we're debating whether or not this is pandering, and also whether it's pandering or not is it crucial to the plot of the story that's going on. Now, you have Kate Herron tweeting, "From the moment I joined at Loki Official, it was very important to me and my goal to acknowledge Loki was bisexual. It is part of who he is and who I am too. I know this is a small step, but I am happy and heart is so full to say that this is now canon in MCU #Loki." So they do now have that representation, which is just true to form for the Marvel brand. You can not like that, but it doesn't change the fact that time after time after time, Marvel comes out and introduces a character that addresses a minority or that represents a minority and gives the people someone they just want everyone to be able to have a hero that they can go, oh, that's someone that can represent me. I can relate to this person, and so on. But for some reason, you like to keep separating the MCU from Marvel for whatever reason. It's owned by the same company. It's Marvel Studios. It's the same executives. It's the same money. It's all owned by Disney now. Like, why do you keep trying to separate these two things? They're the same. They're going to keep borrowing from the comics. It's going to keep happening. They're setting up potentially the Secret Wars. We don't know yet because they haven't got there. We didn't know there was a female Loki because they didn't get there. We didn't know if Loki could appear as male or appear as female, depending on how he felt at the time or she felt at the time. You're dividing the brand to make it seem like pandering when it's just what this brand does. And then you have an issue with the fact that Marvel didn't lay this out in their movie, but in the past movies. But the past movies' focus was Thor. It wasn't Loki. This is now Loki's story. This is just like when Thor gets a movie or two to set up his background, and then Captain America gets a couple movies to set up his, and then Iron Man gets a couple to set up his. Now we're getting Loki's backstory, and we're setting up the Loki character so that later on in the Eternals or in the Multiverse of Madness, we know more of him and we know about his backstory a little bit more. That's what they're doing right now. But you can't sit there and say, because it wasn't in Thor's spotlight stuff, it's now invalid here. This is his chance to be the focus and the center point of attention. This is his chance to have his story told. That's where they're at. And I mean, I'm ready to move into the back and forth discussion and have Rob respond directly to my comments.
All right. If you guys want to take a quick break to grab a drink, a refill, or use the potty, go right ahead. I'm going to
run a commercial.
Check in. Yeah, we're not going to run a commercial. I'll check in with the chat, see how everybody's doing. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. I really appreciate this. Getting Rob and Nerd on for this one here was relatively easy. They both seem to be very passionate about their points. I would like to reiterate the point that we are not, we're not, this is not adversarial in the sense where, it's one person's stupid, the other person's stupid. No, we're not doing that. That's not the type of shows that we want to run here. I definitely want to keep this as conversational as possible. I realize with some of the upcoming guests that I have that may not stay that way, might be a little bit more moderation on my end that was needed. I have to say that both the Rob and Nerd Angle have been extremely easy to moderate. They're both. I don't have to mute anybody. I just let them kind of let them do their thing. They're very respectful of each other, and that's what I like to see here. So I appreciate that. And when we get into the open discussion portion, I'll try and field as many questions as I can. You don't have to super chat; those are nice. But if you put at the plot hole, I'll get as many questions as I can into this back and forth. So, like I said, not necessary to super chat, just at the plot hole. And if I miss it, I'm sorry. I am half blind. Well, I don't know about half blind, but.
And the Rob has landed.
All right. When you two are ready, we will continue.
No. Actually, I want to go the other one because brightness. All right.
All right.
Sorry.
All
Trying to
right.
be snazzy.
No, that's cool. I like that. Like I said, now I've got to do that so I can have 2 angles. Jeez.
I know. God.
Your angle should have 2 angles because, it's his name.
Right.
So,
my goodness. All right, here we go. We will start the open discussion now.
all right. So, how does this going to work? I haven't been keeping up with the comments because I wanted to stay focused.
Don't worry about. I'll take care of the comments. If I get a question in there, I'll put it in there. But so I think what we need to do is start out with the question of why have you decided to separate the Marvel Cinematic Universe from Marvel Studios or from the Marvel Comic Company? I think that would be a good place to start.
Excellent. Thank you, Johnny. And the reason for that is you say that they're under the same banner. As of 2019, they weren't. Kevin Feige has pretty much always been the creative head of the MCU. However, until 2019, Joe Quesada was the creative head of Marvel Comics. They are, in fact, 2 separate entities. Well, they were. As of 2019, they're probably not going to be because, and this is the key point, criticism. Marvel is not doing things because it is in the best interest of the characters. It is not doing things in the best interest of really the fan base. They are watching out for their brand. Why is it that Anthony Mackie has these objections? And this was in Avengers Endgame. So even the actors within the MCU would disagree with the assessment that Marvel is inclusive in some way.
Why is DC so far behind Marvel?
I don't know. And in one sense, the DCEU was actually a little bit ahead of Marvel in the sense that it had Wonder Woman, a movie that was written and directed by a woman, featuring a woman long before Black Widow has come out.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, although I could be wrong on this, I believe that Harley Quinn has come out as bi, but I could be making that up. And there was some speculation that Black Mask was in fact gay.
Yeah,
but that wasn't outwardly stated.
My point to ask that is that Marvel is, when they try to appeal to every walk of life, when a writer tries to be diverse and make content that anyone can consume, they're doing it because they're going to make more money, but that's because they're casting a wider net and more people get to enjoy their content. That's not a bad thing. It helps the company make more money, and then it helps have more fans that like the thing. So why is that okay? Who cares?
The reason why it's important to me and the reason why it's considering pandering is because, again, this isn't a choice that is based on what is best for the character or even best for the consumer, because, again, they only seem to do this after being criticized. Why is it that the MCU needs to be criticized before they will actually have people of color, women, LGBTQ representation? I know you say that they're waiting or what have you to introduce these things, but why are they waiting? Why not? If this were basically best for the characters, then why not have them?
You got a bunch of comics you could go read that have all these characters. They can't throw them all out at you at once. They don't have all of them. And to your point, Fahey came out and said he wanted to create a world where people could come in and use the diverse characters, like exactly as the comic book Marvel brand was designed. Like, man, this is literally just what the Marvel brand stands for. They stand for diversity, inclusion, Excelsior, etc. Thank you, Stan Lee. And to someone's point earlier, you said this was J.K. Rowling level pandering. we've established, or at least I'm establishing, that J.K. Rowling pandering means you didn't include it in the source, and literally all of the stuff that happened before Loki that's not MCU, but again, he hasn't really had his own story yet in the MCU, was Loki being a male or female, or like it's gender fluid Loki. So why is this pandering? It's not. This has all been seen and done before.
So we have a question from Mute Donkey. It says, Rob Parks, how many movies do you want MCU to produce in a year to keep up with the comics?
So apparently I have failed to make my point. My point is that the MCU and the comics are not the same thing. They are not the same.
You can keep saying that. That doesn't make it true, though.
Well, the fact of the matter is, did they go over Ragnarok in the comics?
Yes.
Was Hulk involved?
No. But did Ragnarok
there is
happen?
Clear inconsistencies between the MCU timeline.
But that's a slight difference, right?
That's not a slight difference. That
Ragnarok.
is a huge difference. Oh, and by the way...
Wait. Hold on, real quick, though. Did Ragnarok happen in the mythology?
It did.
Ooh.
Was there a green raging Hulk monster in the mythology?
No. Was Loki involved?
My point is that the MCU timeline, the characters, the actions of these characters, and the actions of the characters in both the source material, well, the comic material, and the mythology, as the so-called source material, are incompatible. Not only is the stuff absent, there is stuff in there that isn't even they can't relate. They can't gel.
How can you make that call if you haven't watched Loki?
Again, my point is pandering is before the fact. They did not make mention of any of this prior to.
You're saying that them putting that his gender is fluid on a TVA rap sheet is pandering. I'm saying that they put that his gender is fluid on the TVA rap sheet because it's relevant to the TVA to know that depending on which multiverse they're in, because the TVA goes between the multiple universes in the Marvel big old universe, it's relevant to them to know that Loki could be a male or a female in this moment. That's why it's on the rap sheet that you were spurred to tweet about.
The point that I made, the other point that I'm making is that that rap sheet, if they wanted to include that information that Loki can appear as male or female, they can. I'm sure there is a list of abilities that Loki can do somewhere, and they can list that as shape-shifting abilities.
But like, wouldn't a police report have, person's name, height, sex, and if you're looking for this person, it would behoove you to know that person could be male or it could be a female.
The transgender community is fighting to be able to change their ID cards to represent the gender that they identify with, because they are male. So, to your point, for a police report, then yes, it should be the gender is vastly important, but may not represent what the person presents as. So my point of view, my point is that gender is a much more important concept than simply, today I'm going to be Lady Loki, tomorrow I'm not going to be Lady Loki. It's and again, the core concept of pandering. It doesn't matter what you do afterward. It's what you did before.
But arguably, they recorded all of this show before they did that teaser trailer that spurred your tweet. So they did do it before. You just don't know about it, and you still don't know about it because you haven't watched it.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. What was put out before the tweet?
They recorded the whole season before.
But the audience has not seen it. The audience did not know. The audience has no relevance.
Yeah, but look at Polygon, and you'll see that the audience and the Marvel fans and the comic fans don't care.
Do you know how much
we knew this was gonna happen?
Do you know how much money the granted, I only have the number for 2014, but do you know how much money Marvel Comics made in 2014?
No.
314 million. That doesn't even come to the box office of one of the MCU movies. The idea that that Loki fans knew that this was coming, that's great. My argument is that the majority of fans didn't. That it is up to the MCU to actually represent these characters as who they are, as opposed to being swayed by.
Yeah. And as soon as Loki gets a spotlight, we're seeing who he is. Isn't that weird?
Loki has been in how many movies at this point? I'd say he's got a spotlight.
No.
He's got enough of a spotlight to be able to at least hint. So, for instance, why do they call him Odin's son? It would have been very easy just to call him.
They don't call him Odin's son.
They could have just called him.
They call him Luffy's son.
Luffy's son. Sorry.
Right.
You understand the point that I'm making, though. Son is the relevant point. They could have called him Luffy child and left it that, but they didn't. They called him Luffy's son.
I mean, I guess he identifies as a male, regardless of the fact that he can, on a whim, give birth and have the female
and
magic.
That is not gender fluidity.
Okay, let me get to this. Let me post this question and then get to Joe Block's question. So, is that the point of contention? The fact that there was no establishment based on the film series in the MCU. That the fact that just because Loki can change doesn't mean that he is gender fluid. Is that if I'm just trying to clarify?
Those are my 2 points. The first is that it's pandering because of the fact that they laid no framework whatsoever, and actually quite the opposite. They doubled down on the fact that he identified as male and never once hinted that his identity could change. His identity could change, not his form, not his tricksterness or his appearance. His identity could change. They didn't mention that as well. The other point that I think is absolutely vital is the fact that he can change his appearance into a woman does not make him a woman. If he identifies as a woman, great. But again, no evidence of that prior to that. And the evidence you have shown actually says that his identity is still male when in the female form, because it says his male form. And to answer Joe Blogg's question,
well, let me ask Joe Blogg's question. Joe Blogg says, at the plot hole, when MCU started to add non-white heroes, was this pandering too? Just joined. Sorry if it's already been asked.
I would contend not that this that is, as I've mentioned, I don't believe that is germane to this argument, but I would contend yes, if they did it because of fan backlash that there was not enough people of color or women heroes, then yes, I would consider that to be pandering. Because it is giving the audience what they want, rather than giving the audience something that they had originally envisioned.
It's giving them, the audience, Marvel stuff, which you could look back at their catalog and see a lot of, because it exists already in the source material for the movies, like I said.
Webarb, I'm not a cat, says, Rob Parks, did you miss a romantic beast backstory, I'm assuming, in the Battle for New York and Avengers to make it not pandering?
I'm not sure. Was there a romantic backstory in the Avengers?
Yeah, there could have been.
Maybe I am missing it. And if that's the case, then I am wrong. But as far as I know, there was.
Well, I mean, is he referring to the comment about Loki's ass? Or no, that was Captain talking to Captain.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, who commented on Captain's ass?
Stark?
Was that Stark?
I think
who
that
said it was
Man.
America's ass. Someone was like, "That's America's ass."
I'm pretty sure that sounds like a Tony Stark comment to me.
Yeah, I forget who said it, but yeah.
Webarb, if you want to clarify, let me know. Then we'll come back to that one. Angel Riviera says, the Rob, you cannot compare MCU with a comic. Example, Infinity Wars has many more heroes than the ones in the movies. Why? Changes are expected.
Man, Exactly. And there's, again, I think
no.
they're setting up.
Exactly. You cannot compare the MCU to the comics, which is what I've been saying from the beginning.
But you can't say that when they bring something from the comics in that they're pandering, when they are telling the story more or less. There's slight changes to it, but it's like, you know, Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. Like, except
like I said, I call
Secret
it
War
pandering because there was no lead up to this at all. It's not as if this is an integral part of the Loki character arc.
But in the show Loki,
Which
it's integral.
It's integral in the show. I'm sure it is, and you know, I applaud them for finally doing it.
Yeah,
but it's pandering because they didn't set up before then. And you know, you're talking about the Marvel, and forgive me if I'm going over, but if you're talking about the Marvel inclusivity, why is it that they decided to focus on the Marvel heroes, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and then Hawkeye and all three cis males, white cis males, and then eventually they got to adding, you know, Black Widow is kind of a major character, and Hawkeye still gets the shaft, literally. There are so many, as you rightly point out, Marvel Comics is about inclusivity. The mutants are mutation is a thinly veiled allegory for homosexuality. I applaud Marvel Comics for their inclusivity, but the MCU is not. If the MCU were, they have a vast storehouse of characters they could have brought into movies.
The comics got years to set up a lot of stuff that they're kind of showing you in the movies. Like, they're giving you, here was Captain America, and then he passes the torch on to the Falcon, who becomes Captain America. And then here's Hawkeye, who I don't know if they're setting up this story, but it sure seemed it when Hawkeye was teaching his daughter how to shoot a bow, and she's going to then eventually become Hawkeye. And, here's Thor, and Thor, well, although he gave like the leadership of Asgard to the Valkyrie, and then we're going to get Jane Foster. So that one's a little weird, but still it did happen in the comics. You had female Thor and Jane Foster. Yeah. So they're trying to like kind of give you the experience. Hey, here were the characters, and then here's how these characters evolved and became, and here's how the torches were passed, etc. Again,
I don't think that's absolutely necessary. They rebooted Spider-Man 3 times.
But that's Fox's fault.
It's Marvel. It's still Fox. Marvel Studios.
And Sony.
They rebooted they've rebooted Spider-Man 3 times. Why did they not once reboot him as Miles? Why not reboot him as Spider-Woman? They didn't. They actively chose to keep with Peter Parker. And it's not because they were trying to tell a story, because they rebooted it 3 times.
But
when you reboot it, you can do whatever you want.
In the Multiverse of Madness, who knows? Like, and again, Earth 16, like the Earth that you're getting, or the Earth in the comics, and then there's the Earth for the MCU. Like, they both had Peter Parker as the Spider-Man. It's the multiverses that had Miles Morales, which is how you got introduced to Miles Morales.
Well, I mean, again, it's their property. They can just make a Miles Morales Spider-Man movie without having to be asked. They could have just instead of rebooting it with what's his face, Chaos Walking, guy who leaks everything, not Andrew Garfield. Come on, guys, help me out. Who's the
Tom Holland?
Tom Holland, thank you. Yeah. Instead of bringing in Spider-Man as Tom Holland, they could have brought in Spider-Man as Miles Morales. Very easy. They didn't. And the problem that MCU has, and I know, and you've addressed this, and Joe Bloggs addressed this, is that the MCU has painted themselves, unfortunately, into a corner because they have not been inclusive up until this point. And to my point, again, to illustrate the difference between the MCU and Marvel Comics, In the MCU, here are your writers: Ashley Miller, Zach Stentz, Don Payne, J. Michael Krasinski, Mark Portovesc, Christopher Yost, Christopher Marcus, Stephen McFeely, Don Payne again, Robert Rodat, Joss Whedon, Zen Penn, interesting name, Eric Peterson, Craig Kyle, and Christopher Yost. As far as I could find, only one of those people actually wrote for the Loki comics, and that was J. Michael Krasinski, and he is credited by simply giving the story of Thor, not actually writing the script. So again, I would feel that the connective tissue between the MCU and Marvel comics is tenuous at best.
Let me get to Indie Tiger here. For 10 says at the plot hole, this seems to be similar to the Star Trek issue where it was owned by Paramount and CBS until recently. One or the other could make Captain Kirk female. Is that any different? Well, I guess the super chat's a little more specific. Situation similar to the Star Trek issue of CBS and Paramount, both owning pieces of Trek. One could make Captain Kirk identify as female. That doesn't mean the other has to follow suit. So would that be considered pandering? I believe is the question that's going on there.
It would depend on how they did it, and if they rebooted it. If they rebooted the series and made Jamie Kirk, no, I don't consider that pandering because it's a reboot. Now, why they're rebooting Kirk as a woman, that I think there is an argument to be made that is pandering. Why not just bring out another Janeway? Why not just create a new character? But if it's a reboot, then I think that argument is less so. I don't know what Nerd Angle has to say about that. About whether or not rebooting Kirk as a woman is pandering.
To me, kind of, yeah. Same thing with like rebooting Superman as black. To me, that's pandering because you're not giving them a new character and telling a story. You're redoing a character that already exists. Like you could have said Superman and what they're doing with Superman. You could have called that pandering, and I would agree with you because they are taking Kal-El and they're just saying instead of him being white, he's now black. That's pandering. But what they're doing with Loki is not pandering.
This is interesting. Do you consider Red Sun to be pandering?
Red Sun, is that when Superman is in Russia or China?
Is a Marxist? Yes.
Yeah. No, that was an interesting tale where.
And how is that different from making him black?
Because he wasn't Kal-El, born in,
Why do the Kryptonians have to be white?
They don't have to be white. Kal-El is white.
Why?
Because that's how they wrote him when they wrote Kal-El, the first time. They wrote him as a white guy. And we have black Superman already. We have John Henry Irons, the Man of Steel. Shaq played him in a movie.
As far as I know, not super. Well, he is a superhero, but he's not super powered.
Neither is Batman.
That's what I'm saying. He is a superhero, but I would hesitate to call him Superman because he doesn't have Superman's power.
Yeah, DC called him a Superman. He was introduced during the reign of the Superman.
But if you read the comics, he was the only one who actually refuted being called Superman. He always
he did. He didn't like it. Fair.
Mute Donkey, are we still talking about if it wasn't? So Mute says at Rob Parks it wasn't important before, now it is. Why should it be shoved into a movie where it isn't important? What exactly? Which point? I'm sorry. Are we talking?
He's talking about gender.
Talking about the gender, Loki's gender. Okay, All right.
If I'm correct in what you're asking, saying whether or not Loki's gender is important, that actually gets to that's part and parcel of the problem with Marvel and inclusivity. A person's gender identity is always important. So the fact that he was not mentioned before illustrates to me that it wasn't on their mind. It wasn't something that they were creatively going to do. It verges into pandering when the change in the character is based on outside forces, outside consumer forces, rather than a creative choice within the MCU.
But it's not a change of the character if it exists in the source already.
I would argue it is, because again, I would argue that being able to change your shape into a woman, even being able to give birth, does not make you a woman.
No, but it makes you gender fluid.
No, actually, it does not. Gender fluidity, as defined, again, by Harvard and by the LGBT community, indicates that you identify as female. And there is no evidence that he identifies as female. Certainly not in the MCU.
The Sophie Loki definitely identifies as female.
Why is she called Sophie Loki? Why not?
You know if you watch the show.
Oh, again, after the fact.
Oh.
After the fact. Pandering occurs when there's nothing to lead up to it. Again, pandering is because the creative choice was driven by market force, not by creative, not by what was creatively good for the character. Question?
I think that Mute Donk was making a statement. The characters they stated started with mostly B-list characters. This is true. The one thing that it seems that if you look at this, the MCU was they tried to kickstart that thing, I think 3 times before it actually took. You had the Hulk with Eric Bana, that was a flop. Then you had the reboot of the Hulk with
Norton.
Yeah, Ed Norton. And then you had Iron Man, which it wasn't until Iron Man blew up that that's when the whole MCU thing started. I
would argue that Hulk is certainly not B-list by any stretch of the imagination. I would also argue
but
Man
if you look at Iron Man, he is not one of the, when you talk about Marvel characters, when you talk about Marvel comics, right? Looking at Iron Man is he's I loved Iron Man growing up. I used to collect his comics, but most people would identify Spider-Man, X-Men, maybe the Avengers, maybe, but that wasn't until later on.
Actually, I would take issue with that, in that the Avengers were huge during Silver Age, Golden Age and Silver Age of comics. The Avengers were the Marvel's answer to X-Men, and Iron Man has always been, I believe Iron Man has always been an Avenger.
You mean their answer?
Iron Man B-list is only to really look at. Iron Man did drop in popularity, like in the 90s, maybe in the aughts. But I still would not consider Iron Man basically the front man of the Avengers. They're, aside from the Fantastic Four, their premier team up to be B-list.
You said they were the answer to X-Men. You meant Justice League, right?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, Justice League. Yeah,
Justice League.
Okay, so I think what we're going to wrap here in just a few minutes. What I want to make sure and understand. I'm keeping up with the chat. No one in this debate is anti gender fluidity, anti LGBTQ, none of that stuff.
Ooh.
That's not the point of the debate. I want to make sure that's clear. I don't want anybody to feel that they are being, belittled or in any way, shape, or form. I think what
I very much apologize if that is the impression that I am giving anyone. I am annoyed because I think the LGBT community deserves better than what they're being given. So I am certainly not against this idea that Loki is fluid. As I said before, great. After this debate, I'm going to watch the show, and I hope that it's fun. I hope that it's interesting, and I hope they do justice to gender fluidity, but that is, again, as I said, after the fact of pandering. And did we lose Nerd Angle?
What happened?
Oh, there he is.
I don't know.
You booted yourself.
Apparently.
Um, so if I could get just really quickly, we're at the end of that 30 minutes, but I did want to ask one thing. It seems to me that your major contention, Rob, is the fact that they didn't even mention this possibility. Like Nerd Angle, you talked about. Well, they're setting up Hawkeye's daughter to become the new Hawkeye. They set up the Falcon to become the new Captain America, and it seems like we didn't hear any kind of setup of Loki. They could have made some sort of setup to Loki's gender fluidity.
This is the setup, though. That's the whole point of this show. Is now the setup.
My response to that is the identity is important enough that it should have come up earlier than this. And the fact that it only is coming up because you have to ask yourself, if the criticism wasn't there, would they have gone this route? And my instinct is to say no. They would not have. They would have chosen a different Loki storyline because, as you point out, there is a wealth of stories to tell with Loki.
All right, now we are going to get into our closing arguments. Nerd Angle, you went first, correct?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to give Rob his 5 minutes to make his closing arguments, and then we'll go to Nerd. Let's have some fun. And your 5 minutes begins now.
All right. First, I'd like to thank Nerd Angle for being an excellent opponent. It brings up very valid points, and it's been a fun to debate you on this topic. And thank you, Johnny, for allowing this to have this debate. I know people think that it's silly, but I truly believe that underneath there is a very serious and very important point to be made about gender fluidity and how Loki being called gender fluid is not only pandering, but it is also potentially hazardous. Now, I just want to revisit my 3 points. Again, as I've stated multiple times, I believe that this is pandering, that whatever happens during the show or after the show, whatever happens on Hawkeye isn't even germane to this conversation. Whatever happens after the show is irrelevant. They did not point to his identity in any way prior to the setup in the MCU. I would also contend that the mythology and the comics are not source material because not only are the stories incompatible in that they don't make sense because they're never referenced, but also they're incompatible because certain events happened in both universes and they happened differently. There's no way to reconcile the two. From a creative standpoint, the people behind the camera have very little or no involvement in the comics. So again, these are not their characters. Loki is very much a character of the MCU, not a character of the comics. And then lastly, I will say that gender fluidity, again, is far more than just changing one's appearance. Simply because he is able to make himself manifest as to look like a woman is immaterial to his gender identity. I would also contend that giving birth is also irrelevant to gender identity because a trans man can give birth and they are a man. So again, not a valid point. Now this goes off slightly from the pandering option, but I also find it to be problematic that MCU has decided that their first LGBTQ character is a villain. And let's not mince words about this. Loki is a villain. He might be cute, he might be cuddly, he might have those gorgeous cheekbones, but he tried to kill his own father. Well, his adopted father. He killed thousands in the incident in New York, causing billions of dollars worth of damage. If Iron Man hadn't been there, because of Loki's actions, New York City would have been nuked. We would have lost millions of people. Loki is also the god of mischief. By that I mean that Loki is the god of lies and deception. and you are tying gender fluidity to deception. People already do not take gender fluidity to be true. They do not take that to be actual fact. They just think think of it as a whim that somebody, oh, I'm going to be a woman today. That's bullshit. And the fact that they are tying gender fluidity to the god of lies, to me, is offensive. And with that, I will close, even though I know I had one more point to make, but with that, I yield.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Mr. Angle, you have 5 starting now.
Okay, so I just want to say thank you, Rob, for coming on and giving me the spirited debate. I know there is some discussion in the chat as to the relevancy of the debate, and no, it has no major impact on either me nor Rob's life. I just think it was something that we got into a little spat on Twitter, and we said, hey, maybe some people would enjoy the debate. And I thought we both came and gave our arguments, and we had an active chat, and we had a entertaining time. As far as my discussion with you, my opinion has not changed. For me, Marvel, the brand Marvel, whether it's MCU, Marvel Studios, the video games, etc., has always stood for trying to be diverse and inclusive and have characters that can appeal to everybody. And to me, this is just Marvel doing more Marvel things. And again, I don't really think that when they showed the rap sheet that his gender was fluid, that it even goes to the extent that we think that it's going, because if you watched it, you'd see how relevant that little blip is to the plot of the show and what's going on with the TVA, and the fact that there's the male Loki and that there's the female Loki, and that the TVA was hunting and is still hunting them. Like, it was all very relevant. And the fact that people are grabbing that snippet and jumping on it, and then people are calling it pandering, is crazy because of all of the past that we've seen from the mythology, which Loki, the god character, the trickster god, who he calls himself repeatedly, especially in this show, the mythology all says that this is nothing new for him. The comics all say that this is nothing new. And in fact, we're seeing some of the old comics in the show now. If you watch it, you'll be able to see why she's called the Sophie Loki, or why she called herself Sophie. And you'll find out that that was actually the good Loki, compared to the one that you were calling a mass murderer, who had joined the Avengers and so on, as the Raven pointed out in the chat, as the Enchantress. So, I mean, I don't think it's pandering. I think it's Marvel being Marvel. I think they're doing Marvel things. I just think that's what they do. And no, that's really all I have.
Of course, you would finish as I am enjoying a delicious gummy worm.
I would.
I need some gummy worms.
I'll set my gummy worm aside and take a sip of this here water.
Yum, yum, yum.
All right. I want to thank both.
So am I being vilified in the chat, in the comment section?
No.
Okay, oh, damn it.
You guys
Not
don't get
at
wrong.
all.
Please don't hate me.
You meant no harm.
I don't.
Yeah,
I love everyone.
This was
I
one
love
to.
everyone.
This debate here was, something that was, yeah, of course, it's not. Are we debating whether Russia should or should not be allowed to have nuclear weapons? Okay, yeah. I mean, not every debate has to be huge. Life-changing subjects. How's the pudding shot, baby?
Whoa.
Yikes.
Okay.
Yikes.
It's now gone.
I don't know what to say there.
All right. Ooh, pudding. Now you're drinking, Skeptic's drinking. I need to go home and drink.
There you
That's
go.
basically what I'm hearing. Particularly if everyone hates me now. Oh,
No,
subscribe to
don't
my
hit Rob.
channel.
Yeah, you should
Well-
subscribe to Rob.
Look, here's the thing. These debates, we're, like I said, we're nuclear weapons. Yeah. I can say it like a good old W. Nuclear. Anyway, every now and again, it's fun to have debates about things that are silly. And this is kind of a silly thing, right? Whether Marvel is or is not pandering to their audience, is that necessarily a bad thing? Of course, Marvel is in the business of making money. So if they're pandering, isn't that kind of what they do? If they're not pandering, what does it matter? You know what I mean? It's a silly debate, but sure. But sometimes having silly debates are fun just because it gets people into having discourse and discussion.
Yeah.
I would like to keep this going because with these types of discussions going, so if anybody has anything they want to discuss and or debate, let me know. Be happy to provide a platform. I've got a couple of good ones coming up. Not this wasn't a good one. Don't you guys get all funny on me.
Oh, wait until people find out what I'm arguing next.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Oh,
That's
God.
going to be
It's academic.
interesting.
I do not believe it.
It's going to be interesting. Next, or this coming up Thursday, I've got an atheism versus theism debate with Jail Warren and Otangelo. That's going to be fun. 8:30 Central on Thursday. And then the 11th, Rob Parks will be back debating craft tequila on the always I don't even want to say the word.
Controversial?
The always agreeable
Oh, yes,
topic
yes.
of abortion. So that'll be an interesting one. Thank you everybody for showing up in the side chats. I appreciate super chats. I appreciate the back and forth, the comments, all the support that you guys give the channel. Really do appreciate it. Get in the old Discord room so you can enjoy more of these types of conversations. This stuff starts in Discord and we bring it over here and have a good time with it. But yeah, as it's going, I think we've been on for just over an hour and a half, and I'd like to give you guys your time back, and I appreciate you giving me your time. Everybody in the side chat, you guys are awesome. Thank you very much. We'll be doing this again, this coming up Thursday, 8:30 Central, with the atheism versus theism debate. Thank you guys for showing up. I'm Johnny O. This is The Plot Hole. You know what's coming up next. Finger guns, baby.